why I actually designed this course is that for all practical purposes, the world of finance as we know it is gone. Now, some jobs are still around and people, banks keep doing what it is that they do, but it's only a question of time until they will have fundamentally changed. If you think of RBC, for instance, their CEO recently came out and said, if you don't learn Python, that means if you don't learn coding, you have no place at RBC anymore. So at least 50% of RBC employees are learning how to code. I've met a trader, an equity trader, somebody in the age who works for mutual fund companies in about my age, so it means mid-40s. He learns Python in his own time so that he can optimize his workflow. So clearly these technological changes change the world of finance and they matter. Now, this is not actually per se a new thing. So let me do a little bit of a history lesson here. So let's first go back to why we're actually all here. Why do we like finance as a field? Now, in a nutshell, this graph exemplifies, this graph I'm going to show you exemplifies quite nicely why people are actually very interested in finance these days. If you look at the numbers, roughly from the early 1900s or so, all the way up to the 1980s, the earnings in finance were quite flat. They were roughly about the same as what people would get, give or take, given the same education level. And then what happened in the 1980s? Look at this. Boom. So, the earnings went up like crazy in finance relative to the rest of the economy, accounting for education and so on and so forth. So why is that? Right. So how do we deal with this, and what does that actually mean? Now, here's another graph which is actually quite interesting. So finance as an area of GDP has grown also dramatically over time. So that means essentially that the financial sector as a whole has become a bigger part of an economy. Now you ask yourself why? Because what finance doesn't do anything by itself. Finance enables other people to do things, right? So they give out loans, they provide financing of some form, they provide insurance and so on and so forth. So how is it possible that it becomes bigger and bigger? Well, one thing that they obviously did is they provide a lot more services and a lot more different tools nowadays than they did in the 1940s. Right? In the 1940s, you had, maybe a few currency trades, you had bonds and you had stocks, and that's it. And now there's a whole array of different services. Now, one of the things, though, that is really quite interesting is that over very, very long periods of time, the unit costs of finance, so it means producing one unit of whatever it is, a financial product, has done essentially, and you can see this has essentially stayed flat. Now, how is this, this is amazing, right? Show me any industry where the unit costs over such long stretches of time have actually stayed constant. Now, there is, I'm not going to tell you any reason why this is, or there's some reason, okay. Cut. Now, the people who work in the financial industry are great beneficiaries of these outcomes. So in particular, there's one economist from NYU, Thomas Philippon, and he wrote a number of papers on this topic, but there's also others. And so basically one of the things that they find is, like, in the 1980s, the wage in the financial services industry was roughly the same as in other industries. In 2006, it was about 170% more than that. In Harvard in 1969, only about 6% of Harvard graduates went into the financial industry. In 2006, that number is up to 28%. And if you look at, so there's a study done for the wages of Stanford Graduate Business School, one of the top business schools in the country, for the MBAs. Those that went in the financial industry made up to 300% of what they got in non-finance industries. So obviously the financial industry attracts a lot of talent and attracts a lot of people who want to make a lot of money there. Now, what drives these wages? Economically, the finding that we have is the ability, actually, it's not just that people are smarter, it's actually that people have the ability to combine their talents with technology. So, this is it looks very funky. This is really just the outcome of a regression equation, but all that it says essentially is that the ability of people to use technology and to leverage technology to their advantage was what always drove the success of people in the financial industry. Now, in the old days, you were successful in the financial industry if you could do a Excel. That is now over. And this is one of the reasons why, for instance, this program at UTM, where we try to push you to learn Python, where we try to push you to learn data science. Marius Zoikon has an extremely good course, which is called Computational Finance, where you learn how to use Python in financial applications. So now, I'm going to skip this slide, blah, 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 skip. Now, much of the discussion and much of the papers that I've cited so far sort of end in 2008. And there is a general question of whether or not finance has actually benefited society. So in other words, unit costs stay high, people made a lot more money, right? And so then you kind of think that, well, is there any way in which we can say that this is great, that this somehow this investment in finance and this attractiveness of finance has made finance better? And ultimately, often what we're after is that more information is produced and that there's a better allocation of resources, as facilitated by the financial industry. Is that true? Is there evidence for that? Well, there's a paper in the JFE from 2013 by Bay, Philippon, and Savov, and they say markets have not become any more efficient. Is there better improvement somehow in allocative efficiency? Well, there is a paper by Aguilar and Bliss, and says basically there is no improvement over long stretches of time in risk-sharing behavior. There is no evidence that allocative efficiency has improved. And so, this is usually measured by total factor productivity. So in other words, it's not like finance produces anything more, anything better. So that would in some form justify the high price that we still pay for financial products. And there's, of course, and this is particular since the financial crisis in 2008, which I understand you have been probably in elementary school at the time, but that notwithstanding, there is a big dispute whether or not the growth of finance has actually brought any benefit to society. If you go to the financial crisis in 2008, you would easily go with the opposite view, right? Because basically the world economy came to a crashing halt, and not for any external reasons other than the financial sector being close to collapse. In fact, actually, the view at the time was that Wall Street, so to speak, was robbing Main Street, right? Main Street, so normal people had to bail out the bankers who continued to receive bonuses and the like, even though they essentially wrecked the economy at the time. Now, I'm bringing this up not because I want to bash bankers, but I'm bringing this up because the nexus time of the development of the fintech industry is usually seen as the financial crisis of 2008. Because at that point and after that point in time, people thought we can do better. And the developments and the fruits of these developments we see, now, or we've seen over the last few years developing. And this is what I'm trying to teach you, and this is what I'm trying to raise awareness of in this course.